Hi, Mike, and welcome to the show.
Hi there, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Jolly
For
good.
for anyone in the industry who's either been hiding under a rock or maybe new to it and doesn't know who you are, I thought I'd just give a bit of a synopsis. So I know you've been around the industry since its inception, going back to early days of the what became the TeleCity Group, and turning that around from what was a struggling business at the time to a multi-billion-pound exit.
Yeah.
You've since held 30 plus non-exec roles in and around the industry. You've got an OBE, a CBE, you've written 4 books, you've trekked to the South Pole, and you've run 40 marathons in 40 days for charity. Obviously, we can't even scratch the surface of that today, but I would really love to spend a bit of time having a walk down memory lane and focusing on that Redbus TeleCity journey that I referenced. And I did have Guy Wilner on this podcast as my first guest, and we did something similar and about his IX Europe days. And that was probably my most enjoyable chat, because it was great for me to understand what was going on in this industry before my time. Yeah, so can we maybe, I think, take everyone back to, I think it was 2002. You'd been away from the UK for around 15 years. You'd had some very successful spells at the likes of Fujitsu, and you came back to the UK and joined Redbus Interhouse as sales and marketing director, only to quite quickly discover you had to launch something called Operation Save Redbus. So can you tell us a bit more about that period? And what it felt?
Exactly. Yeah, it was. I clearly didn't do my due diligence properly, but I was based in Frankfurt. I had a 2-year-old daughter that was born in Denmark, and then a 1-week-old son born in Frankfurt. And the dot-com bubble had burst. Kind of said I'd better get back to the UK and probably safer there than anywhere else. Try and keep employed, and that was really kind of the approach at the time. Never heard of data centers before, and applied for this role. I had no idea really what it was, and there were 2 larger than life characters. The one was Cliff Stanford, who just sold Demon Internet to Thus Telecom, and a guy called John Porter, who was Dame Shirley Porter's son. Dame Shirley was the only person to be convicted of gerrymandering since the Second World War, Westminster Council. So quite a colourful, and he was the kind of grandson to the founder of Tesco's. I was convinced afterwards that I was brought in as a kind of a fall guy, because they clearly knew that the business was basically bankrupted, listed on the UK exchange, spent £450 million, and building data centers around Europe. And of course, there was no demand at that time for data centers. So they were nice. Some of them were nice and shiny data centers. Some of them were converted offices, but it didn't really matter. No one knew what they were and no one used them. So, I came in and the market cap of the business was 6 million listed on the main market, £6 million. And basically it had 6 million in the bank, and that was it. But it was burning 2.5 million a month. So very quickly, I realized that there was a handful of paydays available. So I burst into a boardroom meeting once, and I said, "I don't know if these guys are telling you the truth, but this thing's nuts, and you're breaching your fiduciary duties as a listed company directors." And they said, no. And there was a big fight. And so Cliff and John stormed out, and the others said, well, if you think you can fix it, off you go. As you said, Operation, madness more than Save Redbus. But I tell you one thing, right? People always say, very successful and all these things, but so much is down to luck. So much of success, and if any successful person tells you otherwise, they're just delusional, or they're lying to you. And one of the things, I'm sitting there in John Porter's office and scratching my head thinking, what am I doing here? I was receiving the mail because he'd left, and some of his mail was coming to the office. And I opened up one piece of mail addressed to John, the chairman, and now I'm in charge. So, and it was a members directory of Queenwood Golf Club. It's interesting. I flicked through, and there was kind of Mr. and Mrs. There's Catherine Zeta-Jones and Douglas, and all these people were all members, and I had their home addresses, their phone numbers in it, and everything else. So, and then I noticed this guy called Oliver Grace, who was in there, and who was a member. And I remember John mentioning him as a potential investor. So I picked up the phone and phoned him and said, John's asked me to call, which was nonsense, but John's asked me to call. And he said, you really, you got to come and take a look at this amazing investment, Redbus, and it's going to be brilliant, and you come in early and everything else. And so he kind of said, okay, if John says so, and then he flew over and I convinced him to invest. And then he brought his Russian friend, Boris Jordan, who now actually is referred to as the king of cannabis in the US. He's got he's a billionaire based on the cannabis, legalized cannabis market out there. But so the two of them, and then we brought in a third guy who it was the founder, actually subsequently later, the founder of Just Eat, a guy called Benson. So it sounded like the beginning of a bad joke, the Russian, the American, and the Dane, and so we brought them all in, and they funded this sort of take private at from 6 million market share. I think we took it private for around just under maybe 20 million, and then we consolidated. There was another business at the time which was going through the same challenges, the same pain, called TeleCity, and owned by 3i, but listed as well. So we kind of engaged with them and took that private as well and consolidated it up. But it was horrendous at the time. And literally, I remember, at one point in Harbour Exchange, who most people in the industry know as a super highly connected data center, probably 90% of Britain's internet traffic flows through the building. But at that time, it was empty floors. Sovereign House there as well, and we used to play five-a-side football on the empty floors because it was a converted office, and you'd put this bomb-proof film onto the windows so that it was like just to make it a little bit more resilient, but so you could kick a ball against them and they wouldn't smash, right? So it was one of these bizarre scenario that it was really the Wild West of that. But again, picking up that bit of post, opening it up, flicking through, finding the number, having the courage to give it a call, and have the convincing skills to get them over. That was the beginning of the industry, basically.
I understand Operation Save Redbus involves a lot of cost cutting, like brutal cost cutting, which is necessary. But I also know you got a good slice of help via an act of God. So can you walk us through what happened there and how that disaster turned into being very helpful?
First of all, the cost cutting was quite brutal. I think we cancelled as many projects as we possibly could, but a lot of these data centers have been built, right? And as you know, once you've got a facility, it's a cash burn until it fills up with customers. So, you kind of, we were desperately trying to, we took we took it from a couple of hundred people, 250 people, maybe down to 80. That was one of the hardest things I'd ever done in my life at that point, right? And standing there, having a kind of a town hall with everyone and saying, you've got to go, was heartbreaking. But, and I did that it was just coming up to Christmas. I remember that. And the choice was, I had, I could either let them have a nice Christmas and then tell them they were made redundant, or make them redundant before Christmas, but give them an extra month's money. And I chose to do the latter, mainly because, if they're going to overspend at any time, it's at Christmas, and then they're going to lose their job. So, you want to kind of give them heads up and give them a bit of money to sort of tide them over. But I was swore at and spat at and God knows what else. But I had to focus on the people that were staying, right? And keeping their job safe and trying to keep the company alive. And whilst all this stuff was going on, I had to go out to our latest and greatest data center, which was in Prague. And it'd just been finished building, having been built. And I had a scheduled opening with the British ambassador to the Czech Republic. And so I went out there thinking, this is just another, adding to the burn of there's no way we're going to fill a data center in Prague. And so literally we opened it up, and 2 days afterwards, there was the great floods of Prague. And we weren't far from the river, and the entire river burst its banks. And we had, I think, about a 7-meter high atrium, and the thing just filled up, literally filled up with water. My country manager there, I remember the guy was absolutely a rock star. I mean, he wouldn't leave the building. It was like a captain not wanting to sort of depart the sinking ship, right? And but it was in reverse, because he was going up and up and up, and he ended up on the roof of the building because all the area had been evacuated. He actually messaged me once, and on his mobile phone, saying, "I'm in the plant room, and shall I turn off the diesels, the electrical supply?" And I went, "Well, yes, but what are you doing in the plant room?" He said, "Well, when I opened the door, there was about 8 inches of water in the plant room." I said, "Get out of there and don't touch anything." Like, so he ended up on the roof, and he had to be rescued by one of these fire brigade boats. So he was up there with his mobile phone until the charge died, and a bit of I think it was the Prague equivalent of a Kendall mint cake or something. But yeah, so what I did was I immediately went to the insurers, and I said, "Look, this is beyond repair. This is impossible to use. We're insured for, I think it was about £45 million, but I'll take, if you do a deal with me now, I'll take 8." And the insurers cut that deal for me immediately, and that £8 million kept us going. Because of the amount of burn, there was no way we'd have got to a point to get the investors' money in time had I not kicked the can down the road with that 8 million of insurance money. So yeah, the floods actually saved the business, saved the company.
If we fast forward maybe a couple of years, by 2004, seemed things had started to really turn around. I think a lot of the competition had fallen away during that period of the dot-com bubble bursting. There were 4 companies with 90% of UK internet traffic running through them by 2006. And then by 2006 you merged with TeleCity. So can you maybe talk about that period of growth?
Yeah, I mean, we merged, and the merger itself was quite a challenge, because on the one hand you had this kind of maverick, cowboyish business called Redbus, right? And where things moved fast, people were very kind of dynamic, cut you a deal, and then, but there was terrible kind of documentation and all that sort of stuff, right? There was no kind of order to the place, but it was growing fast. And on the flip side, you had TeleCity, which was like the IBM of data centers, right? It was like everything was procedure and documentation and like big manuals and everything else, but they weren't selling anything, right? So the idea was to try and bring these two entities together, and the biggest challenge for that was the culture mix. Well, first of all, actually, when I announced to my management team that we were going to merge these two, it's like it's like Oracle saying we're going to merge with SAP, and everyone was going, "Oh no, that means consolidation, which means 2 people, 1 job, which means unemployment." All this sort of stuff. I said, you can't, this is going to happen, right? And you've got to be strong, and you've got to be brave, and you've got to keep this dynamic approach to growth, even though, you're consolidating with your biggest enemy. And they really struggled to get over the fear of that. So I took them up into Scotland. And as you go over the old Forth Road Bridge, the old one, there's a large man-made aquarium in the Firth of Forth. It's huge, about 25-meter deep aquarium. And so we pulled up there, and they thought we were going to Edinburgh for a whiskey tasting board meeting, but we stopped there, and I told them, right, out you get, and 2 by 2, put on your breathing apparatus and your wetsuits, and then you go. And of course, they had no idea what they were going to do, and so, but they blindly obeyed, and then they sort of flipped their legs over into this huge thing going down to 25 meters, and then they saw the shark fins floating around in front of them, and like, oh, listen, and of course I was swore at again, spat at, or all the rest of it, but all of them did it, right? And then you go down to the seabed, and these sharks are literally here, right? They're huge sharks, but they're like, less than a foot away. And afterwards, I sort of kind of debriefed with them, and I said, "Okay, how did you feel when you knew what you were about to do?" And they said, "Well, we were absolutely terrified. I couldn't believe you were trying to get us to do this. There was no cages, no, it was just like you and the sharks, right?" And I said, "Well, how did you feel when you were on the seabed on your knees and these things were literally coming around you and almost brushing past you?" And they said, "Well, absolutely terrified still, but it was really exciting, right? It was like, wow, I'm actually doing this." And I said, "How did you feel when we got out?" And they said, I don't want to do it again, but amazing, life-changing experience. I can tell my kids about it. It's just incredible experience. So I said, well, okay, every time you kind of approach something with this attitude of fear, right, which is usually illogical and usually unreasonable fear, then you remember that process of it'll be exciting, you'll get through it, and at the other end, you'll be a better person for that, right? So that's how I kind of got them through that merger of the concept of merging these two together. And of course, after I'd merged them, it was really a good blend of these two kind of process-oriented and dynamic businesses. But there was still a little bit of niggle between there was still a little bit of kind of them and us. So I took the management team, this extended leadership team, up to the North Pole. And we stayed in the ice hotel. I don't know if anyone's ever been to the ice hotel. It's amazing. They rebuild it every year from blocks of pure ice out of the fjords. And, the rooms are ice, the beds are ice, the tables are ice, chairs are ice, the plates are ice, everything is ice. So when we got there, I took them into the ice bar and we were having these shots with ice cups. And that was an important element because at the end of it, they were kind of well lubricated, if you like. And I explained the sleeping arrangements for that evening. And because it's so cold, you have to sleep 2 per bed for body warmth. So the ones that didn't get on well together, I made them sleep, and they were the best of friends in the morning. It's kind of like making sure you put them through an experience that actually bonds them. So that was kind of that, the journey was just taking off because everyone was starting to use data centers. But really, the challenge was the culture. And the getting that culture together was kind of the winning formula. And since then, since we sold TeleCity in 2014, every new business I work with, I usually revert back to my management team of that time and say, I need a country manager in Italy, I need a country manager in the Netherlands, and all of them immediately go, yes, please, because of the culture of the business was unique.
Yeah, no, I think from reading Lifting the Floor, that you take that mindset into how you hire as well, because I know you've talked about you're not just looking for experience, you want, I think you used the word, a spark, and you're really looking for potential when you're bringing people into your businesses.
You look at a CV and you assume that because you're looking for people that have done before what you want them to do, and actually that's a sign of no aspiration in itself, right? So it's like, yes, I want to do the same thing again. So actually for me, I kind of just park. Obviously, the CVs are triaged by somebody, right? And I interview purely on, is this someone that says yes, not as in a yes man or yes woman, but someone that goes, yeah, I think we'll give that a shot. The worst turnoff for me is someone that starts you say something or someone in a group says something and the answer is, the problem with that is, it just drives me mad. I want, like, great, let's give that, or can we improve that idea? But there's a difference in attitude, and having that positive attitude, recruiting people like Rob Coupland at the CEO of Polsant, right? I recruited him into TeleCity when he was a cable and wireless network engineer, right? And I said, well, come on in and we'll work out what to do with you when you're in, right? But it won't be being a network engineer, that's for sure. And then the very first thing he did for us was run the IPO process. So he became point man for the entire IPO in 2007. So having the right attitude of people is far better than having a skill set. I can teach a skill set, I can't teach attitude.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen the same over the years when it comes to hiring people who are on that upward career trajectory and bringing them into roles where they've got something to prove. Like, I think hires that I've been involved in those scenarios have tended to be the ones that have worked out the best, rather than, as you said, the people who are maybe open to moving horizontally.
There's reasons why people would do that. Obviously, if, geographic issues or, those sorts of things, that's fine. But if I'm recruiting for my leadership team, what you want is to give a vision of what do you want to be famous for and when, right? So you want that vision there. And I don't want to have to articulate a strategy to someone. I want them to understand what the vision is, because they're going to be so much better in their role than I'm going to be in their role, right? So why would I want to tell them how to use their role to get to that vision? So everyone knows the outcome that's desired, and then people work out their part of the puzzle, if you like, right? And so for me, it's about, trying to get people that are gonna be collegiate, because they understand they don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, but for their element of that, they have effectively free reign to make mistakes, to push the envelope, and to do whatever it takes to achieve that vision. So, and again, part of that is making sure people are not scared of mistakes, right? It's either success or learning.
So look, taking TeleCity Group ultimately to a multi-billion pound exit, that is just a monumental turnaround from a business that was a few paydays away from, going out of business. Can you maybe just talk about just how the business had changed in terms of scale from when you joined to when you exited, and also what you were most proud of during that period?
I think so. At the very beginning, I think 8 data centers in 4 countries. We bought into Ireland with the great Boris Jordan came on board. We bought into Turkey. We bought into Bulgaria. So we expanded geographically, and then we expanded by doubling down on the data centers and building new ones. Even in London, we moved out of the Docklands, which was the kind of the original core of the business in the UK, and moved into Manchester. We moved into Acton in West London with Powergate, which is 28 megawatts, which at that time was huge. Right, it's nothing now, obviously, but went from sort of, I don't know, probably something in the region of 48 megawatts to 148 megawatts. Which, again, with my business now, EdgeConneX, we've taken almost 2 gigawatts of orders since the beginning of the year. So 148 megawatts doesn't sound a lot, but it was a lot in those days, especially when a typical customer would be maybe 100 kilowatts, 200 kilowatts, right? So you wouldn't have the hyperscalers or anything else there. So that was a tremendous scale, and it required having those champions in country that understood the vision, right? So you didn't have to micromanage, and I guess the thing you're sort of talking about the most pride is that team. They're all doing amazing things in the industry now, right? And they're all kind of they pop up at these spectacular positions in great companies. It really is a fan. We have a reunion every couple of years, and everyone flies in for that in the management team. Not just the country managers, but the head of the customer relations or investor relations or marketing or whoever it is. They all come together on that senior leadership team because of the familial culture of that. So I guess that's probably the best thing, right? It's the growth. Yes, it was fantastic, 6 million to 3 billion, but at the same time, the growth now from EdgeConneX 1 billion to 75 billion in 5 years. It's incredible. It's very hard to have that many. It's almost like a sort of a dream team in football, and the likelihood of it happening consistently, you usually get a generational golden era, and then it drifts away for a while because it's hard to replicate that kind of group of people.
That's one of the things I noticed. Another thing I noticed from reading Lifting the Floor was that even though it predates my time in the industry, and most of the names that contributed or that you referenced, as you say, are very familiar to me, are all in big roles in other businesses today. Looking back, is there anything you would have liked to have done differently during your Redbus TeleCity journey?
It's one of these things that someone said, what's your regrets? And I didn't really buy into that regret kind of dynamic, right? It's because the outcomes justify the trajectory, the journey, if that makes sense, right? So do I enjoy where I am now? Fabulously well, yes. I chair Mediterra in Southern Europe. I chair North Sea in Northern Europe, Stellanor in the UK, EdgeConneX, all sorts of different other businesses. And I could have only done that because of the performance of TeleCity, and that was driven by this great team of people. And so anything that I would have done differently, can always say that, but at the end of the day, no one's going to have a perfect trajectory. And if you have a perfect trajectory, you'll be very boring. So I think it's the dips and the challenges and the cock-ups and the errors that happen, which makes you the value that you are going forward, right? And that's what I tell my kids is like, don't worry about when things go wrong, because you're actually proving how not to do something, right? Or proving what doesn't work. Therefore, you're honing in on what does. So for me, I don't really think about what I would have done differently. I think they're all building blocks, good and bad, are building blocks to the outcome.
Since you left TeleCity, you built, arguably one of the most impressive non-exec portfolio careers of the industry, over 30 roles held. You've already touched on a few of them. Can you maybe talk to me about what that transition was like from executive to non-exec?
Yeah, I mean, so in sort of 2014, I kind of said, well, maybe I should do this plural thing. I was getting a lot of requests for kind of advisory work and things like that. And because of that team was so important to me, I thought the chance of me being able to build that again from an executive point of view is quite difficult. So, and then I came across Terraco in South Africa. Lex and Jan out there, they do a fantastic team. And I remember convincing Permira to have a look at it. They weren't very happy about looking at something in South Africa. They'd never had an investment in South Africa. And so I think we were in the Connaught drinking Cosmopolitans and getting very drunk. And I finally convinced her. I said it was going to be a 10x money in 5 years. And so they paid 100 million for it in 2015, and we sold it for $1 billion in 2019. So 10x in 4 years. And during that time as well, I managed to work with Carlyle in Spain, and we bought a business called Telvent out of Schneider Electric, and that became Iconic, and that sold to Equinix, and that was a 17 times money levered for Carlyle. So in less than 3 years, and so in that period, I started to realize that actually the returns, I felt that maybe I'd have to slog hard for 5 years before I get the first exit. But if I bring in new deals every year, after that 5 years, I should be having exits every year. Can I survive for 5 years before I start getting returns? And actually the returns were coming much faster than that. So it drove me to do more and more. And I guess now I try to sort of keep it to sort of 2, maximum 3 new ones a year. And I'm getting 2-3 exits a year. But it's a bit like buses, right? You can't legislate for when the good deals come along. So, I tend to say yes to them regardless of the quantum that I'm doing at any given time, because you don't know when there's going to be none come along for a very long time, right? So, do the right deals if you feel A, passionately about the success opportunities, and B, whether you can contribute as a non-exec, but also learn something. So you can learn even in the same industry, if it's a different geography, if it's a different approach. So, EdgeConneX is super hyperscale stuff. Stellanor is playing into the inference story, which is about to take off. So, having approaches like that. I also work with 5 Nines, which is a civil engineering company based in London that digs the holes and does all the dirty work for data centers, right? It's the unglamorous piece, but working with them as a non-exec, you get to see a different angle into the industry. So when I look at all these different roles that I have, I try and sort of, obviously they can't be competitive to each other. So I look for things that are complementary rather than in different industries, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So having that view, I was on the board of Eurodiesel, which is a rotary diesel engine manufacturer. So I was able to see from the supply side, the constraints of getting diesel engines to site when a data center orders them. Having the civil engineering guys there, and when you dig a hole in London and you find Saxon remains under there and everything has to stop, and you've got to find out what to do. And so all these different approaches help you understand more holistically the industry, so that you can make better decisions, or at least more informed decisions in your kind of day job, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And what in your view does a good board contribution look like?
So I think there's a number of things that a board does. Now, it talks sort of specifically about private boards rather than listed boards, because listed boards for me have a very heavyweight governance angle to them. So what you want is a board that you can amass from various angles to the industry, a bit like I was saying with my portfolio. For example, with the data, you might want someone from the power industry, right? You might want someone from the technical real estate, a CBRE, Knight Frank type individual. You might want someone from an operational point of view that's perhaps retired. So you want these different guys and girls that can add value from different angles, right? But what you're not looking for, specifically not looking for, is you're not looking for a cheap executive. A lot of venture capitalists try and recruit a chairman and say, "Oh, we're going to pay you, a quarter of what the CEO would get, but we expect you to work 6 days a week, opening doors for us and doing this." That's not what a non-exec team and a board should do. They should be there to support the leadership team, but not do what the leadership team should be doing. And if they feel that that's what's kind of driving the feeling, then they've got the wrong leadership team. So part of it is actually getting that right portfolio of executives, so that the non-execs can actually then challenge, advise, open doors. There is a certain amount of governance. There's the shoulder to cry on for the CEO, specifically from the chairman's role, right? It's a very lonely place being a CEO. The buck stops there, right? So having a chairman there that you can feel kind of in a safe place with, and you can tell your darkest kind of fears to, not too big as well. So having boards that are not, and those kind of different angles of skill sets can also be geographic values. So if you're kind of European based and you have an aspiration to go to the US, bringing in someone from the US is a great idea. And you don't necessarily need them every day as an executive, but you do need them as someone you can say, like, help me think about this at a board meeting.
You mentioned Stellanor, and I believe that's your most recent business that you've got involved in. I know a couple of the execs there. I know Howard, Gary. Can you tell us a little bit more about that business and why you think there's a great opportunity there?
So I work with DWS. We started with North Sea in the US, in the Netherlands, which was a carve out of the KPN assets, the BT assets, and then we acquired the Colt assets, and then subsequently sold the business to Antin. And I stayed on as chair as it migrated over to Antin Infrastructure. And DWS do something very, very smart. They look for kind of complex transactions, and that allows them to bid very efficiently to a business, because they do things that other investment private equity houses feel is a little too complicated or too much hard work. When they did the Colt transaction, there was a portfolio that they said, we'll take the portfolio. Most other bidders were only looking at subsets, but this portfolio was Northern Europe, Southern Europe, and the UK. So we said, well, the Northern Europe piece goes into North Sea. The Southern Europe piece will create Mediterra and start exactly the same as North for Southern Europe. And then the UK ones will create Stellanor, and then go on and build a regional data center play there. So the point of all these three businesses, and specifically around Stellanor that you asked, is that it is a regional data center operator that effectively will tap into a number of the regional requirements, so that, that I know we still talk about these huge 100 megawatt facilities or 500 megawatt facilities, but there is still a strong demand from a local enterprise level for capacity in the area that enterprise is. So for example, if you're in Edinburgh, generally businesses don't want to stick their data in London. They'd rather, if there was an option, they'd put it in Edinburgh. So there is a need for that. And then there's also the latency needs as well. So if you're addressing low latency applications on a local demographic level, you need very localized capacity. And then of course, as we're looking forward, it's the inference story. If you listen to NVIDIA, what they're saying is effectively you've got, another couple of years of these huge LLM modules being deployed around the globe. And then if you fast forward 5 years beyond that, the absolute number of megawatts deployed in inference will outnumber the megawatts deployed in these hyperscale LLMs, right? But in hundreds and hundreds of locations, and not in the flat fee markets. They're instead of it being all in Slough, for example, it's going to be Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh, Newcastle, Derby, Reading. All these localized locations where it's really hard to find 100, 200 megawatts anywhere in Europe at the moment. But you can certainly find 10 to 20 if you go to the regions, right? So that's where inference is going to play. And for example, with North Sea, we put in an inference model into Basel, which is a pharmaceutical hub, right? You've got Novartis and GSK, all these people there, right? So they wanted an inference play to look at specifically one drug. And they said, I don't need AI telling me everything about everything. I don't need that. I just need to know everything about this one drug. And I need it proprietary. This is my IP that I'm paying for. So I'm going to build an 18 megawatts inference story that literally just looks at that application, that vertical. And then that's going to be my competitive advantage. So that's run by enterprise, not by the hyperscaler, right? So that's the next 5 to 7 years. You'll see thousands and thousands of deployments of 10 to 20 megawatts exclusively for inference, driven by enterprise, who are then taking licenses from whichever their flavor is of AI, whether that's Anthropic or IBM Watson or Claude or whatever, and applying those licenses to their vertical application.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And good luck in everything you're doing there with Stellanor. I was going to finish and ask, if you've been through every iteration of the industry over the last 30 odd years, what does the next 5 years look like to you? But I think you maybe already answered that. I don't know.
You can disconnect demand from valuations a little bit in the industry, right? I think if you think about what is a bubble, some of the valuations of SpaceX and things like that, I think are very bubbly. Right. I think it's hard to see how those valuations can be justified, but I can see how the demand is justified. Right. So it's a question of what is the correct valuation of that demand rather than, the SpaceX valuation feels a little bit like 2002, but the consumption of data center capacity does not. Right. So we're seeing significant demand continuing from the hyperscalers to build these LLMs. And the stats that I was given the other day is, there's been as much data generated on the planet over the last 2 years as was generated in the entire history of mankind before that. And the crazy thing is, we'll say the same thing next year.
Yeah.
Including 50% of that. So that growth of data consumption is insatiable, right? And you've got to believe you're going to be using more apps tomorrow than you did yesterday. You've probably got 50,000 photos on your phone that are sitting there on servers humming away, doing nothing. When we can't find the picture when we want them, but we are uneducated and we're very lazy. When we think about all the kind of drive to turn off a light when you go out and things like that, right? But we don't have that same housekeeping discipline when it comes to technology. And more what we do with technology, just exactly as we're doing right now, we're using it 1,000 times a day in our daily lives. We've got IPTV, we've got IP telephony, we've got Zoom calls, we've got everything else, right? So all of these things are going on. And for me, it only gets more. And then that doesn't even include the concept of Internet of Things, which, by the way, has been silently growing in the background. And there's over 10 billion devices connected to the internet now, which is more than there are people on the planet. But these aren't computers. These are kind of almost like dumb input devices, right? So one of the big things is if you can put Internet of Things devices around stuff, you can predict when they're going to fail. So you get a much better SLA with your customer base. So if most things can give off either heat warnings, vibration warnings, or sound warnings, and you can tell in advance of something failing from those 3 detectors. Putting them into every boiler in the country would allow British Gas and their competitors to service your boiler before it fails, rather than wait for you to call them when it's failed. Right. So those kind of things, we haven't even seen that will be 50 billion devices within the next 3 to 5 years. The latency requirements of driverless cars, those sorts of things, they're going to have more and more very, very ultra local capacity needed for those, for the super low latency requirements. And then, even while we've been talking about all this AI, people have forgotten the conundrums that people had about, oh, is the cloud growth going to carry on? Right. And we're always, hasn't everyone migrated to the cloud? Well, no, they haven't. And they're still migrating to the cloud, right? That still hasn't even finished after 15 years. So the cloud is still ever growing. AI is still ever growing, both from an LLM point of view and from these very dedicated inference plays. And I think that's the massive growth we're going to see over the next 5 years is these super local 10 to 25 megawatt facilities doing very, very localized vertical applications for enterprise.
Do you think we'll see like the traditional operators, developer operators that are around now doing that piece, or will we see like new market entrants like Stellador doing that?
In the US, if you want to bid for 100 megawatt power capacity in an area in the US, you've probably got to put $100 million down in escrow. Being a new entrant now is going to be very hard, right? So I can see probably more consolidation going on, right? And that critical mass saying that the right to play is because you have A, the reputation, B, people know that they're not going to get fired for choosing you, and C, you've got the critical mass to do things like I will secure land and power before people have decided there's going to be a data center there because I can, right? And so I think it's going to be more consolidated an industry going forward than anything else. And you probably see the same with the neo clouds as well, right? And I imagine Anthropic's probably a winner, but does CoreWeave survive? Does, some of these kind of smaller operators, do they not get gobbled up? Even at the moment, they're struggling to find the capacity because when the hyperscalers with investment, these guys, credit ratings are better than most countries in Europe. Choosing to do a risky, CoreWeave or something, or on Oracle versus having investment grade customers means that everything's, as long as the demand is coming from there, no one's even looking at these guys. So they're paying premiums and they're saying, help me, help me, help me. So some of those will just get consolidated. And that's from a data center capacity and from a GPU availability point of view.
In your opinion, is there anything in the industry that's maybe not getting enough airtime right now that you think it's important for us to be talking about?
Quite frankly, I think the UK is a bit of a basket case generally, but specifically when it comes to their opinions on data centers, you get these great announcements, oh, we're going to put a gigawatt here. And you get these companies created for the purpose of sovereign data centers, sovereign AI, and that none of the operating staff or the leadership team have ever been in data centers before in their life. But also, you can't get a gigawatt of power to service these things. You've got people saying, oh, wind is great and solar's great, and that's fine. That's all part of the puzzle, part of the overall jigsaw of the answer. But it doesn't service a gigawatt of power for a data center. There's got to be a reality check here, and I think it's slowly dawning on people that actually, when you get something like Scale taking 14 megawatts with Equinix or something, that it shows you they can't build it themselves. So, and I don't know whether those details are true, but something like that. But the other important point, right, is we've got to look at nuclear. Right. And I think small nuclear modules are the way forward for pretty much everywhere. We can't keep growing insatiably the demand and supply and sustaining our ability to provide solutions to you and I through data centers without changing the game from a power point of view. And I think the real answer is having small nuclear modules buried in the ground next to the data centers and no exhaust fumes, nothing from the grid, no pain from the grid, put that back into growing housing and everything else. And people need to get comfortable with that. Then, there's no NIMBYism allowed in that context, right? Or I don't want a nuclear reactor under my, well, tough. I mean, like at the moment you're buying power from France and they're using nuclear. So I think we have to get comfortable with that. And I'm not sure we're anywhere near it, especially in the UK. So I think regulation is so slow and we need answers immediately on this power stroke AI. And at the moment, I think the UK is losing on both.
We get our act together. What realistically do you think would be a time frame on that?
Well, Rolls-Royce have been given a mandate to start developing these. I know they've been tested in the US for the last 3-4 years. I think it's more about an embracing from a regulatory point of view and a messaging point of view, right? So I think messaging for data centers is a challenge. We don't do a good job in the industry telling people. I mean, I saw an article just the other day that they want to convert the Truman Brewery in Brick Lane in London to another data center, and everyone's going, "Oh no, it should be." They're all on Zoom and all this sort of thing, complaining, and Greta Thunberg's doing her tweets and all that. It's using the power in the data center, right?
Yeah, it's the irony.
It's not the data center that's using it. The data center is simply accommodating all these people's actions and putting it into a super efficient environment. Otherwise, all of those things will still be going on. It's just that there'll be a server sitting under your desk like they used to be in the old days, in the 90s, right? So putting it in a data center is a super efficient thing, but the data center doesn't consume the power. We do. And so I think that messaging has to get out to the market and say, well, a little bit of housekeeping won't hurt. But secondly, the NIMBYism has to go. And you've got to have an approach to say, if you want all the features of Deliveroo and Netflix and all these things that we love, and it's part of our lives that you couldn't live on a desert island without all this stuff. Well, guess what? You need data centers.
Okay, Mike. Well, look, really enjoyed talking to you today. Went longer than I normally do because I've been enjoying the conversation so much.
If I've been half as interesting as Guy Wilner, I've done my job.
Yeah. All right. Well, good luck in all of the various board roles that you're carrying out at the moment, and all the best.
Thanks very much. All the best. Take care.